something told me to start writing about ultrasound, because I had all this information about ultrasound being linked to autism, ultrasound being linked to intrauterine growth retardation, ultrasound being linked to nervous system problems, to brain damage, to all manner of health problems and speech delays and speech disorders. And there's just unbelievable amounts of data coming forward right now with the damage that's being caused by ultrasound. And I jumped into this topic because I knew that the history of the technology was in war. I knew that they had used it to try to locate submarines, and I know that the Navy is still using it. We know that when they blast their sonar into the ocean, sonar is ultrasound, as is radar. The whales and the dolphins are bleaching themselves with brain hemorrhages. They have known since the very beginning of ultrasound in the early 1900s that when fish swim into these frequencies, they are killed instantly. Skin is burnt off instantly. I mean, the research that they are doing and that they were doing. One of the scientists, the one who's credited with first using ultrasound for medical diagnosis, his name is Carl Dusik. I looked at this man's picture and I said, this man's a Nazi. I just knew it. I knew this man was a Nazi, so I started really researching who is this brother. And sure enough, he was a Nazi scientist, a mind control scientist, brought into the United States through Project Paperclip, which was a CIA project that brought these very evil people into this country and bleached their background in order to turn them into scientists in the United States and teachers at universities so that the United States government could have access to this level of evil mind control research. I mean, this man was involved in something called insulin therapy, where they would deliberately overdose their patients with insulin to purposefully create an insulin-induced coma, at which point the person, of course, dissociates. The levels of intense biological attack that's happening causes the person to dissociate, at which time they can be programmed. And they were also involved, of course, in electroshock therapy. But ultrasound, the reason I'm bringing this up is because ultrasound has been a very, very important part of mind control from the very beginning, from its inception. They have been using it to hurt the brain.
And it's so massively used now. I mean, when I drive to the grocery store, there's a huge billboard where they say, get your 3D ultrasound here. And they show a picture of a baby. And, so mothers are saying, oh, I want a picture of my baby. They're doing it now without even having a medical indication, just to get a picture, having no clue of what you're talking about, the side effects.
Well, yes, and that's indicative of the level of mind control that's going on in our society, that mothers are not asking this question. What is this? What is this stuff? Let me do a little research here. Let me see what the impact of it. I mean, they're 10 weeks pregnant and they've already had 5 freaking ultrasounds. The more that the baby is exposed to, the more damage that is being done. And this damage is insidious because you can actually burn a lesion into the brain with ultrasound and leave the outer layer of the skin intact. So that
let me just interject here, because I actually got my bachelor's degree in diagnostic ultrasound at State University of New York in Brooklyn. So I studied it for 2 years, and of course we were not taught any side effects of ultrasound except for perhaps an increase in temperature of the tissues, whatever, but no major side effects. Then when I became a surgery resident, turns out they were starting to study intraoperative ultrasound, which they were going to use to burn up tumors. And that's when, my brain started asking myself, wait a minute, you can burn up a tumor with ultrasound, but it's safe for babies? Red flag there.
And what else can you burn up? You see, this is the question that we want to ask. And the older that the baby is in the womb, when the baby's skull becomes more developed, 7th month, 8th month, the hotter it gets, because the frequencies are blasting off the bone, causing more heat and making more damage possible. I want to stress that every time a mother goes for an ultrasound, she is endangering her baby when they are trying to measure the circumference of the head so that they can tell you your baby's too big. You have to have an induction because, they're making all of this up. Okay? Right. None of this is valid. Zero of this is valid. But what they're doing is they're constantly focusing those waves at the baby's skull. And the longer time that they're doing that for, the more damage being done to the baby's brain. And I want to stress, when I say they, I am not talking about every single person that works in the hospital that is involved in doing this evil. Because most of those people are under mind control themselves. To get through medical school, you know,
Yes.
Rebecca.
Yes.
To get through medical school or nursing school, these people are abused, they are sleep deprived, they are forced to engage in some of the most horrifically abusive acts against animals and against babies and against other people, to turn them into psychopaths, to turn them into dissociated entities who are programmed to commit the violence, whose spirits have left their bodies, literally, and a demonic energy can come in to commit the abuse. Most of the people working in hospitals are mind controlled. What I want to stress is the people behind this, the people who create these protocols, the psychotic, psychopathic masterminds behind this are Satanists. They are engaged in purposeful evil with an end goal to control humanity after they kill most of us off and
Yes.
to control the planet.
I totally concur with everything you're saying. When I was in medical school, of course, sleep deprivation is the main way that they keep medical students and especially residents in a zombie-like state where you don't even really participate in reality. It's almost like you're just there. You're told what to do and you do it. But after I caught up on my sleep, and it took me about 5 years before I ever started dreaming again, and looking back on all of it, I can see where it is all satanically programmed. It's designed to do these things that you're discussing. And that's why people have to educate themselves as to what's really going on. Because once you get in there and you get rolled through the door in the wheelchair, whatever, and they, put those consent forms in front of you, which nobody reads, they just sign them. They can do anything to you that they want. So much better for you to become aware of what's coming and to find a way to opt out if possible, although they're trying to make it illegal to do home births. Here in North Carolina, where I live, it's actually illegal to do a home birth with a midwife. Some midwives find ways around it. But, this is insane. Pregnancy is not a disease, but the medical mafia has taken control of it for their purposes.
And their purposes are diabolical, so it's very beneficial for us to understand their purposes.
Right. And that's very important. Let me interject, because when I actually worked after I graduated from this ultrasound program in an OBGYN clinic at Mount Sinai for high-risk ultrasound, and when you scan the baby's head, they have certain criteria that you have to meet to say that you've gotten a correct section of the baby's brain to determine, fetal age. And so this requires over and over again scanning of the brain. And now they have real-time ultrasound, which is basically just constant emission of ultrasound waves when you're using the transducer.
We want to also be aware of something else, okay? Children today are suffering from many, many forms of immune system and neurological disorders. There's hyperactivity, ADHD, learning disabilities, multiple sclerosis, seizure disorders, autism, you name it, and health issues, asthma, autoimmune problems like lupus. It's just unbelievable what's happening to our children.
Yes. Most of this is from vaccines. But as I always say, it's always the big picture. And the more assaults you undergo, the worse the problem's going to get. And many of them actually interact with each other.
That's exactly the point. The interaction is a key to understanding what's happening, that all of this works in unison to destroy a life and to destroy the function of the human mind, so that this person, when I was a kid, there was no autism. There was nobody in my classes that were autistic, and we didn't have this disease. You ask any teacher that's been in a school with children for the last 30 years, what's happening to the children? That teacher's going to tell you they're severely damaged. There is kids that, they can't even talk. Some of them can't walk. Some of them are dribbling idiots. Some of them can't digest their food. I don't want to say anything bad about autistic children because they're suffering, but these are children that obviously had the potential to come in normal, all right? And then these parents are going to say, it's God's will. This is what the plate that God gave me. Well, don't you dare blame it on God, because this is the opposite of God that's causing this. Every piece of this.
Right, and let me say, this is very important. When I was in medical school in the early 80s, we were taught to never vaccinate pregnant women, to never vaccinate children before 6 months of age. Now they're giving vaccines to pregnant women. So they're starting the brain damage there. And then, as you said, let's do another ultrasound, another ultrasound. So that's why we're seeing an ever increasing spectrum of all kinds of disease. The only place you're going to find a normal child is likely with a chiropractor or maybe a child of an Amish parent. Unfortunately, most of the parents of today have been totally mind controlled to just do whatever the white coat tells them to do, and we're seeing what the result is.
Yes, we are. And stupid things like the gestational diabetes test, okay, that gives women this drink called glucola, right, that has like paint thinner in it and all kinds of toxic chemicals in the drink itself. So the attack is multifaceted. It's coming from every angle. What passes for prenatal care is nothing more than a form of torture and poisoning for your child and for you as a mother.
Yes.
Several of the things I want to mention about ultrasound. I read repeatedly, there are frequencies. Ultrasound is basically a technology that blasts sound frequencies that adults can't hear. But children, even teenagers, some teenagers have the capacity to hear these frequencies. And babies have the capacity to hear them the strongest when they're surrounded by a bubble of water, as they are in the womb, in the gestational sac. So I've read over and over that to a baby, it's like being in a subway station when a train pulls into the subway station. That's how loud the decibel level is for the baby. It's overwhelming.
It is.
It really is. I mean, it's just, the deeper I go, the more sick I get, and I can't even write the damn book because I'm just overwhelmed with what is happening to these children. The other thing I want to stress about this is that, let me encourage people to just Google ultrasound and mind control and be amazed at what comes up. This is all going in the book, but you're going to be amazed at what you can find, the connections with this technology. And also Google ultrasound and infertility, or ultrasound and contraception. Because what they're doing right now is they're blasting the male scrotum just 2 times, 15 minutes each pop, creates a minimum of 6 months infertility. And in many cases, it's permanent. So when we are stupid enough to say, I want to find out the sex of my baby, let me go allow them to direct these frequencies at to my baby's developing testes or ovaries, what do we think is going to happen to our children? Do we really imagine that we're not going to have an ever-escalating problem with infertility, which is the goal of these people also? Like I said, depopulation is their primary goal. The last thing they want is for all of us to wake up and to still be here on the planet, because we are going to take these bastards out.
Yes. And let me just say,
overdue.
Why do the parents do it? Because they trust the white coats. And that has been my purpose since I realized what was going on, to get people to stop going to these psychopaths. You can't trust them. There is no such thing as informed consent. They're never going to tell you the side effects of anything they do. So you have to use common sense. And just like you said, Jeanice, go back to nature. Pregnancy is not a disease. Just, let it happen naturally. As you said, prepare for it, use intention, and just do the right thing. Investigate what's actually being done to all of us, because, of course, the babies are the most sensitive of all.
Indeed. I do have a whole curriculum that I've created to sort of help people understand what it means to prepare for conscious conception, what kind of relationships we should be seeking. Absolutely, we should be healing what's happened to us in the womb if we were conceived haphazardly, if our parents didn't love each other, because very often we repeat the cycle. The cycle becomes intergenerational of traumatizing relationships and conceiving babies haphazardly and gestating them in wombs where they're not wanted and birthing them in trauma. So we have to get serious about healing ourselves before we even get into a relationship, ideally, and start to make children, and then also understand what needs to happen while they're in the womb, The father's role in all of this is hugely important, and we could do an entire show just on that, because our culture has sort of put the father on the periphery and acted like, their role is unimportant, and these white coats step in and usurp the father's role during the birth process, further disempowering the father and causing a breakdown in the mother's trust of the father's power. So there's so much that we need to become conscious of